Hi, welcome back to Kingdom Portions here on Kingdom in Context. This week we're going through Genesis 48 through 50. We're going to be looking at the death of Joseph and even his father Jacob, also called Israel. And we're actually going to be digging into how. How did Israel know what to say to his sons on his deathbed? Fascinating episode. We have some really fun parents, so we're glad to have you. Hi, thanks for joining us here again on Kingdom Portions, here on Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean Griffin, accompanied by my incredible and lovely co-host.
Hey guys, I'm Lindsay. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom, my dear.
Guys, this week we're in the portion of Genesis 48 through 50, so we'll be finishing out the book of Genesis. It's been an incredible book, and we got some fun portions that we're going to be pairing up, not only from Joshua. I'm kind of excited because we rarely get into Joshua.
Yeah.
But we're going to jump into Joshua a little bit with one of our pairings, as well as Ezekiel, Matthew, Jubilees, and even another apocryphal book, an extra biblical book that used to be in the canons, in the Apocryphals. It's actually called the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. So stick with us till the end. It's going to be a lot of fun, just simply because it's information that only validates what's in the canon.
Right.
And it used to be in some versions of Bibles. It just only recently was it removed. So I think you're going to get a lot out of it. But as always, if anything that we're saying here on the channel, not just these Kingdom portions, but also all of our videos that we do, we do a Saturday night show called Honor of Kings. Then I put out periodical videos as well on different topics on the context tree for the channel. But if there's anything on the channel that has blessed you, or that you feel that you would like to see us do this more or even full time, we've put in the link below the video here. There's different ways that people have chosen to ask us how they can support us, right? How they can donate to us. So not only Patreon, PayPal, but we also have a PO box down there as well, in case you want to send a physical donation instead of electronic. But we just thank you for prayerfully considering that. And as always, we like to remind people that we're not Levite priests, because we do, at Kingdom in Context, we encourage folks to follow the biblical model of the instructions that were given to us. So any donation that's given to us because of this channel, we're not receiving it as a tithe. It's simply a love gift offering to people that are preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, and that is built upon the principle that Jesus taught in Matthew 10 when he sent out his disciples. That's all it is. So we just thank you for prayerfully considering that. Other than that, sweetie, I'm excited to get to this one. Yeah. This is a fun one. So we're going to be in Genesis 48 is going to be our first chapter, for those of you following along at home.
All right. Genesis chapter 48. Now it came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel collected his strength and sat up in the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. But your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. Now as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died, to my sorrow, in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, Who are these? Joseph said to his father, They are my sons, whom God has given me here. So he said, Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well. Then Joseph took them from his knees and bowed with his face to the ground. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand towards Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand towards Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph and said, The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." He blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you, and bring you back to the land of your fathers. I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the land of the Amorite with my sword and my bow."
Thank you, sweetie.
Sure.
Okay. Interesting turn of events. A little bit of a plot twist from Joseph's perspective, right? He puts his two boys up before his dying father, and his dad. It's just like it's like playing Twister with the blessing. And we see that Manasseh is kind of, he doesn't get the bigger portion of the blessing, which I think is interesting. And we remember a couple of weeks ago where we kind of defined this idea of the blessing. Right. And this idea of him trying to bless people and what that really means long term, right? And how this comes to a really fun fulfillment once we get to the kingdom. And this is just, lines up exactly with that, because Ephraim is told that he'll become a multitude of nations. So what's interesting, before we go into that concept, though, is in verse 5 where he does cross his hands over and he gives the firstborn blessing to Ephraim instead of Manasseh. Is that he claims them as his kids. Right. He's already got 12 kids, 12 sons, one daughter. But then he claims Joseph's as his. Now, we know he's not trying to get out legal paperwork and saying, you're signing your kids over to me. Yeah. No, we get that. But he's just saying in the sake of what he's going to give as far as a portion in the land of promise to come. And this is a fantastic moment here that helps us realize Jacob's understanding of the future kingdom to come that you and I will be a part of. So this is way back when he already had that perspective. This is the gospel of the kingdom of God, the good news of the coming of the reign of the Father through his Son, the Messiah, that was prophesied way back in the day in the book of Enoch to come down to the earth. And that Jacob was already aware of this whole perspective. Right. To the point where he's doing special things with this blessing with Ephraim and Manasseh. So this is we just want to point that out for the viewer because we are Kingdom in Context. And this whole idea is that all of the scriptures are built within the context of the coming kingdom of God. Here's just another example of that. Yeah. So I think it's fascinating. Oh, and by the way, he grabbed another portion from the Amorites. The Amorites. Yeah. So that means, and we're actually going to talk about that a little later, right? About what he does with some of the portions when we get to our Joshua pairing. Right. And so we'll save that. Stick with us. In about 20, 30 minutes, we'll be getting to that part. But anything else that sticks out to you, sweetie?
Well, it's interesting what's going on here with the breaking of custom. And I say custom for a reason, because we don't have any law laid out for how to, be doing these firstborn, secondborn type things. But clearly there was a custom at the time involving, no questions asked, the firstborn gets this, everyone after gets such and such. But what's also interesting is that he is bestowing this blessing onto some of his grandchildren, which all of the other sons have children, especially at this point, at the end of his life in Egypt. They all have children. So, the bringing in of these two grandchildren through Joseph is interesting to me. And, I wonder if it's symbolic of us being grafted into the family of God through Yeshua, the Father accepting us, who once were, out of covenant, into covenant through the authority of our high priest, his son. It
is to me the wonderful passage of Isaiah 57, right? Yeah. That he's bringing in the Gentiles, those who were far, he now brings them near. Yeah. Joseph was far, and his children, he's now bringing them near. Yeah. So to me, I see a lot of parallel there. Yeah. Which could be why Manasseh is called a multitude of nations, plural, and Manasseh is just going to be a single great nation.
No, Ephraim is called a multitude. You said Manasseh is called...
I'm sorry, Ephraim was the multitude of nations, and Manasseh is just a single nation. both of, Manasseh was still said he'll be a great nation,
right.
But out of Ephraim come the plural nations. So that's interesting.
I mean, we see the name Ephraim used later on to refer to swaths of, Israel as a people group. So I don't know how much there is a connection there to the actual Ephraim who existed.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely some cool symbolism going on there, as usual with the story of Joseph.
Yeah, Genesis is just loaded, guys, with all this. Now, of course, why would Jacob even know to do this?
Right.
Or to even consider, out of all the grandkids, and to consider these guys. Well, remember last week from the other portion we read, I believe it was in Genesis 46, where he talked about he was nervous to go down to Egypt. Although Joseph had already invited Jacob down, he didn't know if he should go or not. He stuck behind so he could celebrate the festival of first fruits, which is also the Shavuot, right? And also the Feast of Weeks. It's a double-fold festival. And he celebrated that with old grain, just trying to do the best he could. And an angel appeared to him and would try to reaffirm to him, okay, it's okay to go down to Egypt, and Joseph will put his fingers upon your eyes. That's a way of telling him that, by the way, Joseph's the one that's going to see you at your death.
Yeah.
Right? So he already knew that he was going to have this moment with Joseph on his deathbed. The very last one to see him. And that could have prompted him. And then we're going to read about how he would know, as far as these portions of land, how he would know any of that stuff in relationship to the kingdom. We're going to go over that in some of our pairings. So that's kind of what I'm excited about. It's really fun background stuff, that just brings in a whole new perspective to this, how much do these guys actually perceive and understand,
right,
to be considered the fathers of our faith, right? We're talking about the guy who's literally got the moniker for the entire faith of Israel. We're all grafted into spiritual Israel, right? I just think that's fascinating.
I personally don't know how you can read Genesis and come and walk away thinking that they didn't have any form of the law beforehand, that they didn't have any books beforehand. Like, I don't know how you can read even just Genesis on its own and not deduce that, they had books, they had at least some of the law was revealed to them. I mean, probably most of it. Anything that, was related to the temple and the Levitical priesthood was later at Mount Sinai, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me...
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's because not only is it not being spoken about or taught about, but people aren't reading the book.
That's true. That's very true.
They're not being encouraged to actually read Genesis. So, this is kind of the point of why we do these kingdom portions. We're literally reading them with you. But we hope, our prayer is that you pick up this habit and you continue to read this book on your own time.
Yeah.
And our goal is to show you how wonderful it is and how chock full of relevance to your future it is, so that you become interested above anything else, that might be a circumstantial hobby in your life, that you become interested in realizing how important it is for you to understand these words as well.
Right.
And you start reading them,
Yeah, well, I mean, discernment, I like to think of discernment as a muscle, and it needs to be exercised. And the best way to strengthen your discernment muscle is to read this book as much as possible. And I know that it can be hard to find time to sit down and read. And so another tip that I would give you, audio Bible. There are all kinds of translations of the Bible available for free on YouTube. There's apps you can download. I listen to the NASB on YouTube every day at work. So you can, inject some more of the word into your life on a regular basis, even if you don't have time to sit down and be reading it. But all the times in our life when we're doing things where we have something on in our headphones or on the TV in the living room while we're doing other things around the house, you could have the audio Bible on and be getting a little bit more of that word, flowing into your ears.
That's right.
And then the other thing is that when you sit down and actually read it later, after you've been listening to it on audio for a while, it seems like it sets in a lot quicker. I don't know.
Because different people have different ways of learning.
Yeah.
Some are visual, some are auditory, right? And maybe you're an auditory person and, you're sitting in a service and your eyes glaze over. But even though what you're not hearing is what you need, as far as the meat of the word with relevance to you, and that's what we hope to provide both visually and auditorily. So, that's something that you could practice if you like. Anything else from this chapter, or let's move on to 49?
Yeah, I think we can go to 49.
Okay. Do you want me to read this one, or do you want it?
It's your turn.
All right.
There aren't any crazy names in this one, so.
I think we'll be all right.
All right.
Okay. So this will be Genesis 49, and it says, Then Jacob summoned his sons and said, Assemble yourselves, that I may tell you what will befall you in the days to come. Gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their council. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hands shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp, and from my prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion he dares rouse him up. And as a lion who dares rouse him up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are dull from wine, and his teeth white from milk. Zebulun will dwell at the seashore, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall be towards Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the sheepfolds. When he saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulders to bear burdens, and became a slave at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people, as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his riders fall backward. For your salvation I wait, O Lord. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he will raid at their heels. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he will yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a doe let loose, he gives beautiful words. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a spring. Its branches run over a wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, and shot at him and harassed him, but his bow remained firm, and his arms were agile. From the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. From the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb, the blessings of your father, have surpassed the blessings of my ancestors. Up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills, may they be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, every one with the blessing appropriate to them. Then he charged them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abram bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and with his wife Sarah, and there they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and there I buried Leah, the field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Het. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. All right. Yeah. Okay, so many of you may be thinking what we thought. Jacob says, let me gather you together. I'm going to tell you what's going to befall you in the last days. That was verse 1, right? Mm-hmm. He's on his deathbed. He gathers his 12 sons. He says, I'm going to tell you what's going to befall you in the last days. He then goes through each son and says something to each son, and then he ends it with, I have blessed you with a blessing that's appropriate to you. And a lot of the things we read, sweetie, didn't sound very blessing-like.
No. No, not at all.
No.
It didn't sound very much, describing what befalls everyone in the last days.
Nope. It's like we're missing a huge part of the conversation.
In Genesis?
In Genesis.
No.
Yeah. The book that's abbreviated, apparently, as we're finding out through our studies, that because it's encoded, I keep trying to remind people this, and if you've never looked into the actual Hebrew letters behind the text of Genesis, there's an encoding in there that I'll just let you study that out on your own. We may do another video on it at some point in the future, but yeah, the words are placed there for a reason, and so things are summarized, stories are summarized in the book of Genesis for a reason, and so I just think it's fascinating that he's going to tell them, he announces the meeting that I'm going to gather them together to tell them what's going to befall them in the last days. Well, you're like, wait a minute, what? First of all, it didn't seem like he said anything to that regard. Right?
Not at all.
No, it doesn't. And then you're like, wait a minute, but why would you even get to make that claim? How would you even announce that to have that knowledge, that you're going to tell all your sons what's going to happen to them in the last days. Stick with us until we get to our pairings later, because we're actually going to go over that concept, which was, it's wonderful, right? How he even would have access to this knowledge. And it supports an apocryphal extra-biblical book that, we feel should maybe intentionally has been hidden from the body of believers, because it helps fill in so many of these plot holes just like this. And now it's been hidden from the modern body of believers here in what we will call Christendom, like the Catholic Christendom, all the way up to the Protestant Reformation and the Bibles that have been used in that vein. Mm-hmm. But yet there's an earlier than the Catholicism, right? Earlier Eastern Orthodox group of people from Ethiopia that are descendants of Levites that have had a Bible with their own collection of scriptures in it, that has this apocryphal book that we're going to read from later, that helps us fill in the plot holes that we just read in Genesis 49.
Right.
They've always had it. They've had it for over 2,000 years. So they never had a question about Genesis 49 or where Jacob could have had this information received from. So I just think just stick with us and we'll talk about it here in a little bit. What else in this passage seemed to stand out to you?
A lot stands out, and I think that's probably why we'll probably go over this chapter in a bit more detail when we get to it in the cycle next year. Because for right now, we're sticking with the flow of, talking about the kingdom, talking about, some of the back context to how Jacob has this information, things like that. I think one thing that we will point out, and we've talked about this before, but here we're finally at the chapter, that we have referred to, this seeming condemnation of Simeon and Levi that seems to come from Jacob. So, if you guys have been following our portions, you've seen our other episodes where we've specifically talked about what Simeon and Levi did in Shechem and how that was righteous judgment. And Jacob...
But they were following the instructions of God's Torah, his law.
Jacob himself had a problem with all of that they did. God did not have a problem with it, and that is why Levi was blessed with the priesthood. It was specifically because of what he did in Shechem. So what we have to remember here is not everything spoken out of the mouth of a person in the Bible is God speaking. In this case, this was Jacob's personal opinion of what had happened in Shechem. And all this time later, it appears he still is somewhat resentful about it.
As a quick point of clarification, just in case people didn't fully understand what she's getting at, is that we believe everything in here is the Word of God.
Right.
But even within the storyline, there's people in there that have part of the story is us seeing their opinion on things.
Right.
Right? Just like we see people lying in the story from one character to another. We know that the lie is not what God's encouraging us to do.
Right.
We're just taking the context of what's being said from the story. So as we've already pointed out, like she was saying, that episode, Sweetie, was called Why Did Levi Kill All the Men at Shechem? I think it was like 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So...
just to clarify, the reason that I said that about that particular verse is because people use that verse to then go on and teach that God condemned what Levi and Simeon did in Shechem. And God did not condemn that. He actually rewarded them for that.
Yeah,
so.
And we see that in Malachi too, as the father re-explains the covenant he made with Levi because Levi was upright.
Yeah.
And as we already talked about in previous portions, just as a quick reminder for them if they haven't seen those, Jacob was moving in fear during those events that happened with Dinah. And these men had transgressed to the point of raping his daughter. He was going to let that go. Yeah. And he was going to let this guy named Shechem have his daughter after he'd raped her. So this is against Torah on 3 different levels, guys. This is Jacob, and this is just us revealing to him some of his personality flaws, right? Some of his character flaw, of the fear that he was moving in. And that fear is announced at the end of that story when he's mad at Simeon and Levi for taking vengeance on all the men of Shechem.
Yeah.
So the point is, just like we read back in a few episodes back where Isaac was going to bless Esau, even though Esau didn't have a heart for the father.
Right.
And that's why Abraham had to tell Rebekah to go in and make Jacob, be presented as Esau so he can get the blessing, because that was a character flaw we saw within Isaac, right? So the whole point of this is that in spite of these frail men, just like we're all frail, we all have issues, we all have problems. These men and their own character flaws, the father is still accomplishing what he needs to get done.
Right.
and he's still rewarding those who keep his ways and his upright judgments. So that's what he does with Levi in that event.
And do you want to just real quick mention the 3 levels that it was breaking Torah? You said it's breaking it on 3 levels. So we have letting the rape go.
Right.
But we also have him... He was going to marry his daughter off to people he's not supposed to marry his daughter to.
That's right, to a Canaanite. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was another thing. What's the other one?
Well, it's just the fact that he was going to allow for the transgression of Shechem to go unpunished. Right. Right. He was going to allow the kidnapping. Remember, because he kidnapped her.
Yes, that's right.
He just didn't take advantage of her physically and then let her go back home. Yeah. He literally kidnapped her.
And then kept her captive. And then Jacob was allowing her to be held captive.
Was that in Deuteronomy 21 or... I can't remember exactly where that is, but yeah, that's a clear violation of Torah. You can't kidnap people.
Yeah. So, but the big glaring one is he was going to let his daughter marry Canaanites, and that's, that was a big one. Big time no.
Yeah, so there was 3 different ways that Jacob was failing to keep God's instructions. Simeon and Levi stepped up and did it, and then Jacob was in fear both before and after the event, and that's what we're getting referenced here in his deathbed. Is he was saying, and by the way, if you look up the actual, in the original... like the original KJV of this particular part where it says, let not my soul enter into their counsel. Yeah. It says, let not my soul enter into their secret talks. Yeah. Because remember, this is where we can't do like a 5-hour show. Yeah. But as we talked about from a previous episode, Levi was instructed what to do in this moment because he saw that he basically went in and took care of the men of Shechem, and Jacob didn't know what he was going to do. Right. So he did it in a sense behind Jacob's back in secret talks with Simeon, right? And then Jacob finds out later. Yeah. So that's kind of where that was going in that passage. So anyway.
Yeah, there's so many things to delve into with that particular chapter. So many of them I would need to study with you for a little while before I feel like I could.
Well, what we wanted to say in general is the whole of chapter 49. I know we just addressed a couple of specific spots, but remember, we can only hit so much each year because we're trying to keep these to a manageable length for the viewer and for us. Yeah. So we don't have time to go into all the rest of the things and the implications of each son and each blessing that was given to each son and what it means. So we're going to do that next year. Whereas we're going to read the same portion of 48 through 50, but we're going to spend 90% of our time on chapter 49. Yeah. So just bear with us. We got a lot of other fun stuff to go over in 48 and 50 this year. You ready for 50?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to be reading Genesis 50, guys.
All right. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, then I will return. Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, and as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the household of Joseph, and his brothers, and his father's household. They left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. There also went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation, and he observed 7 days' mourning for his father. Now when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore it was named Ebel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he charged them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him? So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, Your father charged before he died, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons. Also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then God made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt.
Interesting words.
Yeah.
Interesting words. The word embalmed was used. Not modern practices of being embalmed, but Egyptian embalming.
Which would be mummification. Did you ever think about that, guys?
And they buried him in the cave.
Yeah.
Where everybody else was.
Yep.
Where's that cave? Because he may still be there, embalmed.
Yeah.
Mummified.
I would think he is.
That's wild, guys. That is wild.
Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, that could be part of the long-standing deceits of the enemy is to try to, change the names of towns, demolish some towns through war, reorganize things, to try to cover up this cave wherever it was in this territory so that no one could try to excavate it.
Right.
Because you may have literally on display the body of Jacob, Israel, and Rebecca, and Sarah.
Everyone but Rachel would be in there.
Everyone but Rachel.
I think even the 12 sons were brought up and buried there too.
Yeah, all of them. So talk about a testament to the validity of the Bible.
Yeah, talk about confirmation. Is it any wonder why they're, all up in that land over there?
That's right. Constant warfare, constant territorialness of, this is my land, and, because they don't want anyone to, in my opinion, there's a lot of things they want to happen, but they would never want this cave to actually be discovered.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating because it would testify everything. Yeah. Everything. So, anyway, that's fascinating, guys. Maybe in the future, maybe in the future. But so we have another interesting moment here where the brothers are doing some more shenanigans.
Still paranoid about everything they did to their brother Joseph. All this time later, they've got the choicest land in Egypt. They've lived there how long with Joseph now?
17 years after they moved down there, before Jacob dies. Yeah. They're living there. Joseph is interacting with them. He's already told them, I forgive you, show them graciousness. You can have the best of the land. They can help their herds and families are flourishing. And then Jacob dies, and they're like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
Now, what if now's the moment that Joseph's been waiting for to get vengeance on us all this time? It's like, guys,
and yet again, we see the fruits of the Spirit.
Joseph is just so loving. He's like, don't fear, don't worry, lay off the peyote. Jeez. The paranoia is running rampant in the land of Goshen. Like, it's enough. Anyway, so maybe, who knows? To me, but it's fascinating that they actually have to construct a letter. Right. So that they can act like Jacob wrote it before he died.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if Jacob was ever told before his death, ultimately,
I don't know
what the brothers did to Joseph. It seems like they might have kept this, all of them. It seems like they all kept this as a secret from Israel the whole time. I don't know. I mean, I would suppose that it would probably spare him even more emotional turmoil than he's already had in his whole life. Right. To find out all this time later that it was...
That 10 of the brothers were lying this whole time.
Yeah, it was the sons this whole time that had done that to Joseph.
So you got 13 kids, and you 12 sons. And you find out at some point at the end of your life that 10 of the sons tried to kill one of your sons. Yeah. Yeah, that would cause you a lot of grief and heartache. And I'm sure
not just tried to kill him, but then kept it secret for all those years. And then when he's found, you find out, they actually threw him in a pit and then they sold him. And then, I mean, it's just...
Well, remember what happened when Joseph was declared mauled by a wild animal and dead, even though he didn't have the body for evidence. Who else died? Was it Zilpah or Bilhah?
I think it was Zilpah and Dinah.
Yeah. So two people died as a result. Yeah. And this was what we talked about in Joseph and the Day of Atonement a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
So there was huge implications to them lying about what happened to Joseph. And yeah, I don't think they told Jacob until he died.
How do you broach that conversation? Like, how do you, just over dinner one night, like, hey, by the way, Dad.
Yeah, and imagine...
We've been lying to you for 40 years.
And imagine Joseph, every time they come around Joseph, or every time Joseph comes around, they're thinking he's going to tell him.
Yeah.
He must have told him. Look at the way Dad looked at us. Did he think he told him?
Does he know?
Yeah.
Did he find out?
And you just have like Jacob running in, throwing sandals at all of them. Just rapid fire sandling.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You guys will understand that.
We'll get to that later.
Later.
When we get to the house the house with one sandal idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we'll
get to
talk
that
about that here, but
no, it's gonna be like 6 months
later
from
episode,
now.
yeah.
When we get to that part of the Torah portion. But anyway, so the famous passage, verse verse 20 or something, where he talks about what you guys meant for evil, God meant for good, just to keep many people alive. So Joseph, in his benevolence as a leader, as a brother, in his fruits of the Spirit, he's still trying to reassure the brothers, look, I know what you guys did. He wanted to kill me, but what you guys meant for evil, the Father meant for good, and look what's happened, right?
And what a parallel that is to Yeshua's own death, What people back then truly meant for evil.
Yes.
Backfired on him a bit, to say the least.
Absolutely. So think about it like this. Yeshua resurrects. He's appearing over a period of 40 days to the disciples and other people, as the Gospels tell us. And those people know other people in town who knew people that were part of the brute squad of Pharisees that murdered him, right?
Yeah.
That gave him over to the Romans to be murdered. And do you think that they experienced this same kind of paranoia? Like, whoa, he's back? Is he going to be mad at us? Like,
I mean, if the story is true that there was an actual Roman centurion that was sent to look for his body, I would think that would come from that place.
They were probably very afraid, like, whoa, wait a minute. This guy resurrected. Maybe he was the Son of God.
Yeah.
And if that means he was the one the prophets were talking about, then we've got nothing but judgment coming our way.
Yeah.
Because we killed him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's, or we tried to. So he doesn't stay dead. He's not a quitter. So anyway, but yeah, I think that was fascinating that these brothers are still in paranoia after all this time, to the point where they're like making up letters. Oh, by the way, we found this. Our dad
at a certain
made a letter.
Point, like, I feel bad for them. Like, I'm like, geez.
Well, that's self-inflicted torture.
I know.
On
that one level, obviously, it's like, you brought that upon yourself. But geez, the more I realized how long they. I mean, I think we've all done things, back in our childhood, that we felt horrible guilt over, and we're so afraid of being caught and get in trouble for it. I used to, like, if I would do something bad and be, hoping I didn't get caught, I would get stuck in that guilt and feeling really, really bad for myself. And I would, like, look at my little cat on the bed and think, I wish I could just be the cat. Why couldn't I just be the cat? Their life is so easy, So, I just can't imagine living with that. I mean, that times a million was probably what these guys were experiencing. So
that's probably what cats feel when they're like knocking stuff off ledges.
They have no remorse. They have no empathy. They are little furry sociopaths. So
we may edit that part out. Probably a lot of cat lovers in the audience.
I love cats. I just know that they're sociopaths.
You love the furry sociopaths.
I can't help it. I'm a dog person. I'm biased.
My heart, or my thought anyway, is that when Joseph receives this letter from his brothers saying, we found our dad wrote this before he died. Please forgive us. He's commanding you to forgive us, right? Like I think Joseph saw through it. Personally, this is in the scriptures, guys. This is me talking. Like I think that he saw through it.
Yeah.
He's in a place of love and forgiveness already. And he was just like, it's okay. He's probably laughing in the back of his head. These guys and their tricks, And he's just like, it's okay. I still love you. It's fine. I have nothing intended bad for you. And he just want to bless him. And this is what I love. I think we're going to read, or maybe did we read it last week, where it talks about all the days of Joseph's reign, there was no enemies, or there's no Satan.
Yeah, that was last week.
And it also says all the brothers of Israel dealt with each other in love, and they loved each other. Okay, I think that's fascinating. Just that it would include that little commentary. So, okay. So we finished our regular portion, and we'll go into our portions.
Pairings.
I can't. Now I'm just mixing the two words together. So we'll go to our pairings. And
Pourings.
that's right. And the first one we're going to read from is going to be out of Joshua chapter 19. And this is going to be verses 1 through 9. This is our prophet's pairing. The book of Joshua, man, there's just so many pattern prophecies in the book of Joshua. Like that's its own entire series.
Yeah, it really is.
That we could go through. In fact, on one of my videos I've already made, if you haven't seen it already, it's going to be in the First Resurrection series. I believe it was in First Resurrection, The Last Trumpet. I think it was that as part 2 of the First Resurrection series on my channel. I actually go over the Battle of Jericho in the book of Joshua and how many symbolic layered prophecies are built into that to the coming of the Lord, the return of our Messiah on the day of the Lord. So go check that out if you want. It's a lot of fun.
All right, we're doing 1 through 9?
Yeah, 1 through 9.
Then the second lot fell to Simeon, to the tribe of the sons of Simeon, according to their families, and their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the sons of Judah. So they had as their inheritance Beersheba, or Sheba, and Molada, and Hazar Shual, and Balha, and Ezem, and Eltalad, and Bethuel, and Hormah, and Ziklag, and Beth Markaboth, and Hazarah Sua. Oh, I think this was actually supposed to be your reading. And Beth Lebaoth, and Shah Ruhen, 13 cities with their villages. Ain, Ramon, and Ether, and Ashan, 4 cities with their villages. And all the villages which were around these cities as far as Baalath Beer, Ramah of the Negev, this was the inheritance of the tribe of the sons of Simeon according to their families. The inheritance of the sons of Simeon was taken from the portion of the sons of Judah, for the share of the sons of Judah was too large for them. So the sons of Simeon received an inheritance in the midst of Judah's inheritance.
Okay, thank you, sweetie. So the reason we paired that up, guys, is because remember we read back in Joseph's quote blessings to Simeon and Levi where he said, and you will be scattered amongst Israel. Okay? I can't remember what verse that was in Genesis 49. But so the reason we paired that up is just to help to educate the viewer on how that actually came true. Because Simeon, as we just read, was given actually a smaller portion of cities within the territory of Judah. So he didn't get his own big portion like all the other brothers, and even like their new quote-unquote brothers, Manasseh and Ephraim, right? Who got their own big portions. They got like, some Airbnbs inside of Judah. You know what I mean? So like they, a little bit bigger than that. But the point is, they didn't get their own, and so over time, they actually got assimilated into Judah, which that's why they're kind of, according to most historians, kind of lost,
right?
To the whole genealogy down the line, because, and they lost a lot of people, by the way, in the Exodus, in the book of Numbers. If you actually count in Numbers chapter 1, how many people were counted in the tribe of Simeon, till after all the bad things happened in chapter 25.
Yeah, a lot less of them.
From Korah's rebellion to chapter 25 and the plague that hit, and all the different things that go on throughout to get to the point of chapter 25 of Numbers, they lost like 26,000 people, and they only had 45,000 to start or something like that. Like they just lost a ton of people, and all the other tribes were doing great. I mean, they weren't. So not just that, but the fact that the portion of land they were given in the days of Joshua was already a part of Judah.
Right.
So they were kind of scattered into the nations literally. And then we've got, of course, Levi is given the same type of concept, because his portion, they were given all the city. Was it 48 cities, I think it was?
Yes.
They were given, we read about that in Deuteronomy in our portions there. And then as well as the sanctuary cities. But these 48 Levite cities were scattered throughout all the tribes. So they were literally priests. Scattered. You're right, because each tribe needed a priest to go to for all of their obedience to the commandments. So they're literally scattered, and that's how that worked out. Our next pairing that we want to go over real quick is Ezekiel 8, verses 5 through 18. And so let's jump into old Ezekiel, because he's amazing. Or as some people want to call him, Ezekiel. But, we're not from the South, so... Okay, guys, so this is Ezekiel chapter 8, starting in verse 5 through 18. It says, "And then he said to me, Son of man, raise your eyes now toward the north. So I raised my eyes toward the north, and behold, to the north of the altar gate was this idol of jealousy at the entrance. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations which the house of Israel are committing here, so that I would be far from my sanctuary. But yet you will see greater abominations. Then he brought me to the entrance of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. He said to me, Son of man, now dig through the wall. So I dug through the wall, and behold, an entrance. Then he said to me, Go in, and see the wicked abominations that they are committing there. So I entered and looked, and behold, every form of creeping things, and beasts, and detestable things, with all the idols of the house of Israel, were carved on the wall all around. Standing in front of them were 70 elders of the house of Israel, with Jaazaniah, the son of Shaphan, standing among them, each man with his censer in his hand, and fragrance of the cloud of incense rising. And then he said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark? Each man in the room of his carved images, for they say, The Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land. And he said to me, Yet you will still see greater abominations which they are committing. And then he brought me to the entrance of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. And he said to me, Do you see this, son of man? Yet you will still see greater abominations than these. Then he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. He said to me, Do you see this, son of man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they are committed here, and that they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly? For behold, they are putting the twig to their nose. Therefore I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them. Okay. So Ezekiel is getting a vision of some behind the scenes of some of the rebellion that was happening in his day amongst the Levites and the elders of the people as they were going into the temple and profaning the temple, right, worshiping other gods in the boundaries and in some of the interior rooms of the temple itself.
Yeah.
Like, this is the biggest no-no that you can do, and this is just another, in my opinion, another facet of what was being prophesied in Genesis 49 about them, right, the Levites being scattered into Israel. And we're actually going to get to some more of that here in a minute, actually, with some of our pairings with the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. But, sweetie, what are your thoughts? I mean, that's just wild, right?
This is something that you and I have been talking about for a long time, that, as you know, it's not discussed in not churches, but it's also not discussed, in any online teachings that I've ever seen, is this consistent problem of the priesthood being corrupted. And so, understanding not only the role of a priesthood in the Father's creation and, mankind, God, we need a mediator there in between, and that's what the priesthood does. Not only understanding that, but then understanding this consistent issue, because this is like this is the kingdom of Judah doing all these things. Right. We still have the northern kingdom of Israel, right, with their own corruption of the priesthood going on that got them scattered out of land. So one thing that Sean and I just wanted to draw people's attention to is this consistent pattern of the priesthood being corrupt. It's not just about the people of Israel.
Because the people were to be led by the priests.
And the priests were held to a higher standard. They were supposed to be set apart according to the word. And so it's even more egregious that the priests were, engaging in this idolatrous worship.
We see it later in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 44, that the priests were actually bringing in people into the temple that were uncircumcised, both in heart to the Father and in their flesh.
Right.
So on every level possible, they were profaning the covenant that they were a part of, and that they were supposed to be ministers of.
Right. And the reason that for us it might not seem obvious to you on the surface why we would pair this with the chapters that we just read. But as you know, we just got finished reading a story about someone who symbolizes our Messiah. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to help people remember here is, who is our Messiah? What does he do? What's his job? He has a job. He's our high priest up in heaven. And this is the reason here in Ezekiel and other places this stuff is talked about, that
Malachi
we need
1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. Yes. Also in the New Testament, we see, they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing in the temple either. Different offenses than what we see here in Ezekiel, going on in Jesus' time, but still offenses nonetheless.
Still not following the commands of God.
This is what we want to help you guys understand, is why we need a high priest. A lot of people talk about how we need a perfect sacrifice, and that Jesus is our perfect sacrifice, without realizing what we actually need is a perfect high priest. Because there's no sacrifice, there's no literal sacrifice that does what Jesus does up in the heavenly tabernacle, where he's actually mediating, interceding on our behalf as our high priest.
Right.
So
actually, we're this weekend releasing a companion video that we did a live stream about on our Facebook social media page.
Yeah.
Which goes for an hour and a half explaining the priesthood of Jesus and the nature of his sacrifice.
Right.
So I don't know exactly what the title is going to be yet, but if you'd like more information on that specific vein of topic, we're releasing that whole video here in the next couple of days this weekend. So
and when
be
Sean,
looking for that.
Yeah, when Sean can carve out the time in his schedule, he intends to do a whole full-length teaching on this concept of our Messiah's sacrifice and
multiple videos actually, because I'll be breaking down the Melchizedek priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, and then comparison to what Yeshua fulfills through prophecy.
Yeah, we sat down to prepare for the live stream and started, making a list of scriptures and realized, oh my gosh, this is like
3 hours.
We should have known it's way deeper than it seems on the surface. But man, once you actually start studying it, it was like, this needs its own whole series. It has a whole branch on the tree here.
Yeah, when I created the channel originally, I put certain thematic themes that are all throughout the scriptures. I put those themes in the context branches on the context tree as you're seeing on the screen right now. And so one of them is the priesthood.
Yeah.
And the point of that is, if you do not understand the whole idea of what a priest is and why it's so important that Yeshua was to be our high priest, then you're missing some of the greater implications of your Messiah.
Yeah.
So I do plan to expound on that fully in the future.
Yeah.
I just haven't had time yet. So.
I can testify that I really think that the understanding the priesthoods is like number 2 or 3 after, understanding the kingdom and understanding the resurrection.
Yeah.
As far as unlocking scriptures that never made sense to me before.
Yeah.
Now that I understand, the priesthoods.
Well, that would make sense since the kingdom is ruled by our high priest.
Exactly.
Who has the authority to resurrect us.
Exactly.
That's right. It all ties together, guys.
Yeah.
So that's why we made a context tree.
All right.
So our next pairing that we're going to look at is actually the Book of Wisdom from Psalms. And we're going to be looking in chapter 81.
For the choir director on the Gittith, a psalm of Asaph. Sing for joy to God our strength. Shout joyfully to the God of Jacob. Raise a song, strike the timbrel, the sweet-sounding lyre with the harp. Blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon, on our feast day. For it is a statute for Israel, an ordinance of the God of Jacob. He established it for a testimony in Joseph when he went throughout the land of Egypt. I heard a language that I did not know. I relieved his shoulder of the burden. His hands were freed from the basket. You called in trouble, and I rescued you. I answered you in the hiding place of thunder. I proved you at the waters of Meribah. Selah. Hear, O my people, and I will admonish you. O Israel, if you would listen to me. Let there be no strange god among you, nor shall you worship any foreign god. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it. But my people did not listen to my voice, and Israel did not obey me. So I gave them over to the stubbornness of their heart to walk in their own devices. Oh, that my people would listen to me, that Israel would walk in my ways. I would quickly subdue their enemies and turn my hand against their adversaries. Those who hate the Lord would pretend obedience to him, and their time of punishment would be forever. But I would feed you with the finest of the wheat, and with honey from the rock I would satisfy you.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful psalm.
Love the Psalms.
Yeah, definitely encapsulates a lot of the stuff we've been reading about.
Yeah.
And there's also some encouragement in there as well. But so, anything that sticks out to you in that one that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I just love how much most of the Psalms, go back to mentioning that time of Joseph and, the Exodus coming out of Egypt. So, I think it speaks for itself, unless there's anything you want to say about it.
No, it's good. We can move on to our Brit pairing here in Matthew. And so we're going to be reading out of Matthew 23 and then verses 34 through 36. So it says here, "Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in the synagogues and persecute from city to city, so that upon you may fall the guilt of all the blood shed on the earth, and from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zacharias, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation." Okay, The reason why we included that was because it's Yeshua reprimanding the Pharisees for their behavior, talking about how they killed the prophets, right? People that were trying to actually uphold the commandments and remind the people to keep the commandments. So much so, they participate in this behavior over a long... So this is the Yeshua revealing what most people already knew, but revealing and explaining the corruption within the priesthood.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is the whole... Why he mentions Zacharias was John the Baptist's dad, who was a priest who was killed between the porch and the altar. And this is where you had these other high priests that were come in that were kind of leaning towards Roman influence, right? Therefore, they were teaching this Judaism commands, which were not the commands of Yahweh. They were adding to the Torah. They were adding to the instructions and confusing the people, which is what Jesus called a burden on the people, right? Yeshua referred to the commands of the Pharisees as a heavy yoke, and that he referred to his commands, which are the commands of Yahweh, as a light burden or an easy yoke. Okay, so this whole concept here is there was just as we saw before the northern kingdom of Israel was scattered by the Assyrians, and before the kingdom of Judah was invaded by Babylonians through Nebuchadnezzar, and they were scattered, we saw that kind of rebellion and apostasy happening amongst the priests. We see this taking place again, leading up to the days of Yeshua, which is why the people themselves, Yeshua referred to them as sheep without a shepherd, right? They were being led by blind guides, people they did not have a heart that was being circumcised to the Father's commands and his ways, and they were teaching their own oral traditions and commands that were superseding the ones that they were supposed to be teaching, which was the job of them, right? And also the scribes and the priests, the Levites. So there's this heavy influence of watering down the truth of the word and teaching man's opinion instead of that truth, and therefore the people were confused. And this is why so many of them had struggled to accept Yeshua,
right? Because
they didn't have a clue. The priesthood had already been attacked, so to speak. So they didn't have a clue about what they would even recognize as the Son of Man, which is why you have these unique conversations, right? Where you have people come up to you and saying, we've heard the Son of Man should be like this.
Yeah.
And other people come up saying, well, we've heard the Son of Man should be like this, right? And then you even got people like Nicodemus, who was supposed to be a teacher of Israel, which was the role of a Levite priest. And he's saying he didn't even understand the resurrection,
right?
Which is like a central concept within the faith of the covenant. So Yeshua has to reprimand him in John chapter 3. So the whole point just reveals to us through these subtle conversations that the interaction people with Jesus during the Gospels, that the priesthood was still under attack. Therefore, he came to fulfill the role as the Messiah, to be anointed high priest through the fulfillment of prophecy, and they didn't even know what they were looking at.
Yeah.
So they're deceived, right? And this is the attempt of the enemy to try to get people to not accept the Messiah.
Right.
This is still happening today.
Yeah.
Guys, this is still happening.
Yeah.
No one is... Okay, so let me just back up. The enemy does not want you to understand the concept of the priesthood all throughout Scripture, what it means to you, why you need it, how the Father uses it in his law and his instructions, and how it's going to provide for your resurrection on the day of the Lord. So when people say that the Torah is done away with, they don't even know what they're talking about, because then that means they're throwing out the priesthood as well, which means they've negated the whole purpose for Yeshua to be resurrected and made our high priest.
Right.
So this is ignorance that people are talking about. They don't even know the background and the context of the story that leads up to their salvation and resurrection on the day of the Lord. So this is why we're trying to provide, with fervor and zeal and passion and love for everyone that's watching, we're trying to provide context to the story so you can understand your walk with the Father better, and your Messiah, who was glorified unto your high priest, you can understand him better to love him all the more. Yeah. Because the enemy is constantly trying to get you to ignore that fact. And then therefore you only know a part of the story of your Messiah.
Right.
So
have you ever asked yourself why you need to confess your sins to him?
Right.
I mean, if
1
he
John
just
1:9. Yeah.
If he just had to come and die and that covers all your sins, then why do we still have a process of confessing those to him? Yeah. It's the priestly process. That's right. So just...
Yeah, in the book of Hebrews, there's many, many passages where he's declared our high priest. And it's all over the place. Yeah. It's all over the place. And there's a reason for it. So this is why we're trying to bring to light, if we can.
Right.
All right. Some of our extra biblical pairings we want to run into real quick is Jubilees Chapter 32. And in this one, we're going to be reading verses 17 through 29. And so I'm going to pick this one up real quick. And so here it says, And the Lord appeared to him by night, and blessed him, and said unto him, Your name shall not be called Jacob, but Israel shall they name your name. And he said unto him again, I am the Lord who created the heaven and the earth, and I will increase you and multiply you exceedingly. And kings will come forth from you, and they shall judge everywhere, wherever the foot of the sons of men has trodden. And I will give to your seed all the earth which is under heaven, and they shall judge all the nations according to their desires. And after that they shall get possession of the whole earth, and inherit it forever. And he finished speaking with him, and he went up from him. And Jacob looked till he had ascended into heaven. And he saw in a vision of the night, and behold, an angel descended from heaven with 7 tablets in his hands. He gave them to Jacob, and he read them, and knew all that was written therein, which would befall him and his sons throughout all the ages. And he showed him all that was written on the tablets, and said unto him, Do not build this place. Do not make it an eternal sanctuary. Do not dwell here, for this is not the place. Go to the house of Abraham your father, and dwell with Isaac your father, until the day of the death of your father. For in Egypt you shall die in peace, and in this land you shall be buried in honor with the splendor of your fathers, with Abraham and Isaac. Fear not, for as you have seen and read it, thus shall it be. And do you write down everything as you saw and read? And Jacob said, Lord, how can I remember all that I've seen and read? And he said unto him, I will bring all things to your remembrance. Then he went up from him, and he awoke from his sleep, and he remembered everything which he had read and seen. And he wrote down all the words which he had read and seen. And he celebrated there yet another day, and he sacrificed thereon according to all that he had sacrificed on the former days. And he called its name Addition. For this day was added, and the former days he called the feast. And thus it was manifested that it should be, and it was written on the heavenly tablets. Wherefore it was revealed to him that he should celebrate it, and add it to the 7 days of the feast. And its name was called Addition, because that it was recorded amongst the days of the feast days, according to the number of the days of the year. Okay. So the reason why we paired this, guys, there's so much fun stuff in here. There's 3 things that we want to talk about in this short pairing. For one, just as a point of context, this is Jacob, and in the previous part of the chapter, he's celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, okay, which is also called Sukkot. And in this part, he's just calling it the feast. Back in Genesis 14, it was already called, Jubilees, either Jubilees 14 or Jubilees 17. It's already called the Feast of Booths. Feast of Tabernacles, that Abraham was the first one to keep it. So this is the context to help us understand what it's meaning when it says he calls it the feast. So in addition to that, just as a setting of what we're looking at here, Jacob is keeping the Feast of Tabernacles, and he has a vision, and in this vision, this angel drops down with 7 tablets and says, read these things, because this is going to be what's going to befall you and all your sons throughout all the ages. Now, that's exactly what we read in Genesis 49:1, where he gathered his sons to him and said, I'm going to tell you what's going to befall you guys throughout to the last days, right? So, and then, of course, we're looking at Genesis 49, and we're saying, well, he didn't really go into all that.
Yeah.
You know, what's going on there? This is the moment validated from Jubilees of why he would even say that.
How he would know.
How he would know that, right? So, literally, the Father told him that information through an angel from heaven. And he then has to write all this stuff down, right, so that he can pass it on. We read at the end of this chapter, he gives that book to Levi.
Yeah.
So that means Levi is going to know what's up this whole time.
Yeah.
And all the brothers. He told them all.
Yeah.
I'm sure he read it all to them. So, and then another thing I just want to talk about here is also the concept of the addition. So this is where he adds another day onto this 7-day festival of tabernacles. And this is a unique part of Jubilees because it actually gives us information that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy does not give us.
Right.
When it comes to this celebration on the 8th day, the day after the end of Feast of Tabernacles. Now, Exodus 24, I believe it's verse 38, it says, and at the end of the year, at the feast of you want to celebrate the Feast of the Ingathering.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't tell you what day.
Right.
It doesn't tell you what month. It just says the end of the year. Okay? Leviticus 23, it tells us in the 7th month, after you celebrate Sukkot, you want to keep the 8th day as well. But it doesn't quite explain everything. Right? Then in the book of Numbers, Numbers 29, it then gives every day of the Feast of Tabernacles, all the sacrifices they were doing, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then it adds on, and also on day 8th, do these as well.
Yeah. Right?
And this is also a Sabbath, and you shouldn't do any work on this day, and remember to keep this one as well. And it's the Feast of Ingathering, right? So it doesn't tell us why. It actually doesn't even call it the Feast of Ingathering in that moment, but it just tells this is what you do on the 8th day. So you'd have to be very, very, very diligent to line up Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and then just assume that's the same thing it's talking about. Whereas here, it's explained to us why we keep an 8th day right after the 7-day festival of Sukkot. And it's because of this moment where Jacob is told all this wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
And how interesting is it? Because if you look, sweetie, up here in verse 19, he says, and, the Father is telling Jacob these promises, right? He says, I will give to you, to your seed, all the earth which is under heaven, and they shall judge all the nations according to their desires. And after that, they shall get possession of the whole earth and inherit it forever.
Yeah.
So we're not talking just about the promised land at this point. We're talking about, people always ask us, sweetie, what happens after the millennial reign? Here you go.
Right there.
It's right here. Jacob was told what would happen throughout all the ages, right? That would befall him and his sons throughout all the ages. And in this concept here, we're looking at, okay, so not just is he going to get the kingdom of God as a possession, since he already knew that information. He's also getting information about what's going to happen forever, after the millennial reign. And as a result of this information, he adds an 8th day feast. I'll let you start with that one. Yeah.
Really cool, guys, because if you know this concept of 1,000 years being a day in the sight of the Lord, and if you understand this concept of us being on like a week time frame of these 1,000-year, week of millenniums, basically, and then you get to that 7th day, okay, that's his rest, that's the Sabbath day for 1,000 years where we reign. Then after that, we have this 8th day, an 8th day that starts that leads us into eternity. So there's this awesome, everybody notices the 7th day symbolism here and there, but I think people rarely notice the 8th day symbolism. We also have, a son is to be circumcised on the 8th day. And if you think about that concept, even at the end of the millennium, we have, in my mind, I see it as all of creation is circumcised when we finally, that second resurrection happens, everyone is judged, and then Sheol and sin and death itself are destroyed. So there's some awesome symbolism here for not just the millennial reign, that kingdom, but the kingdom into eternity.
That's right.
So
it's amazing.
It's really cool.
Yeah, and because of that, just in case you ever wonder, what's the significance of the Feast of Ingathering? Right? Which didn't even really give us a date, but it's just kind of lumped in with, oh, by the way, on the 8th day is another high holy Sabbath. We get the explanation, guys. Yeah. And it was so important that Jacob made another whole additional Sabbath because of it. You know what I'm saying? Which is fascinating. Also, in this, the third thing we just want to briefly mention, in this pairing that we're looking at, the angel says to him, oh, by the way, everything you saw and read, write it down. But don't build this place that you saw and everything you just saw and read. Don't build this place. This isn't the place. This isn't the place for the sanctuary. He was shown the sanctuary of God. He was shown the temple of God that Moses was actually patterning the one on the ground after in heaven, right? On Mount Sinai. Yep. So it's fascinating because Jacob gets excited and he's like, I want to build this here. Yeah. Let's do this, right? And the angel's like, no, this isn't the time. Not for you. You're not the person. This isn't the place. And but I'm just showing you everything, right? Yeah. Because what does Jesus say? The master doesn't tell his servants his business, but his family, his sons, right? He tells them his business. I can't remember the exact. Remember the exact moment.
Quite the paraphrase, my love.
Yeah, it is a paraphrase. I can't remember the verse off the top of my head, but this is what we're seeing happening in this covenant moment with the Father and Jacob, is because he's showing him all of his future business, and it's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, we gotta keep moving real quick. So we're gonna read Jubilees 46 1 through 11. All right, Jubilees 46 here says, and it came to pass that after Jacob died, the children of Israel multiplied in the land of Egypt, and they became a great nation. And they were of one accord in heart, so that brother loved brother, and every man helped his brother. And they increased abundantly and multiplied exceedingly 10 weeks of years, all the days of the life of Joseph. Then there was no Satan nor any evil in all the days of the life of Joseph, which he lived after his father Jacob. For all the Egyptians honored the children of Israel all the days of the life of Joseph. And Joseph died, being 110 years old. 17 years he lived in the land of Canaan, and 10 years he was a servant, and 3 years in prison. And 80 years he was under the king, ruling all the land of Egypt. And he died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And he commanded the children of Israel before he died that they should carry his bones with them when they went forth from the land of Egypt. And he made them swear regarding his bones, for he knew that the Egyptians would not again bring forth and bury him in the land of Canaan. For Macmaran, king of Canaan, while dwelling in the land of Assyria, fought in the valley with the king of Egypt and slew him there, and pursued after the Egyptians to the gates of Iman. But he was not able to enter, for a new king had become king of Egypt, and he was stronger than the former. And he returned to the land of Canaan, and the gates of Egypt were closed, and none went out, and none came into Egypt. So Joseph died in the 46th Jubilee, in the 6th week, in the 2nd year, and they buried him in the land of Egypt. And all his brethren died after him. And the king of Egypt went forth to war with the king of Canaan. In the 47th Jubilee, in the 2nd week, in the 2nd year, and the children of Israel brought forth all the bones of the children of Jacob, except for the bones of Joseph. And they buried them in the field in the double cave in the mountain. And most of them returned to Egypt, but a few of them remained in the mountains of Hebron, and Amram, your father, remained with them. And the king of Canaan was victorious over the king of Egypt, and he closed the gates of Egypt. Okay, so what's interesting about this is not only do we get some political upheaval that's going on, expressing how things were really good during the days of Joseph, but then immediately turmoil takes over when he dies. And you've got wars being fought, different things happening. But what I think is fascinating, like we already mentioned earlier, is all the 12 sons, were except for Joseph. So 11 of the 12 sons were taken, their bones were taken to this cave where all the other patriarchs were buried. And it says some of them stayed behind.
Right.
Which is interesting. And at the very end there where it says, and Amram, your father, that's Moses' father.
Yeah.
So again, the whole narrative of Jubilees is the angels are speaking to Moses throughout the entire book of Jubilees, giving him all this instruction on Mount Sinai, explaining to him all the Torah that they're given, all the instructions and laws are given to him. They're explaining to him the backstory about where all this stuff came from.
Right.
So Moses is getting an in-depth history lesson in addition to the lesson on the commandments, right?
Yeah, I mean, how many people have read through the book of Exodus and wondered, well, where did that king come from that didn't know Joseph?
Exactly.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah.
It didn't escalate quickly. It was through this whole, this warring of the king of Egypt with the king of Canaan. And so there was a totally new king that came on the scene that didn't know or care anything about Joseph.
And I think Exodus 1 just makes a brief statement saying a new king rose up who didn't know Joseph and he started oppressing the Hebrews. But there was even more backstory to that.
Right.
And so I just think it's fascinating that, what's even more so is that you have the father of Moses. Now, this doesn't mean he stayed there his whole life because we know that Moses was born in Egypt. But it's interesting to me that you have the father of Moses actually stayed in the land of Canaan. Right. Why would he even do that? Yeah. Unless he knew everything that was being expressed from this information that Jacob had received.
Right.
Right? So if they pass that information on to his descendants, and then all of them as they multiply over a few hundred years, you know what I'm saying? Even to the point where he tells them, don't take my bones out of here until we all go forth.
Right.
You see what I
mean? And Joseph probably also had the wisdom to understand his role in Egypt was so incredibly important. And he knows how the Egyptians treat their dead.
Yeah.
So most likely Joseph probably had his own fancy tomb and everything, mini Pharaoh style. And so it would make sense that they probably wouldn't have been allowed to take his bones out of Egypt at that point.
That's right.
So,
because they're probably huge ceremony for his death.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, all of Egypt wept for him for 70 days.
That's
so
true.
That's a pretty big deal.
That's a big deal. Yeah. All right, guys. Our next last pairing that we want to talk about real quick is from the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. Okay, now, just as a real quick introduction to this book, it's an apocryphal book. Used to be in many of the canons. It was actually also in an Armenian Orthodox canon in 1666, and it is dated back to the 2nd century BCE, just like many of the apocryphal books. I personally suspect that this is one of the books that Ezra, the prophet Ezra, that he restored because he was a scribe. So he restored a whole bunch of books, and about the Second Temple period when the exiles returned from Babylon. And so I personally suggest that this is one of them that he restored, but ultimately it's an apocryphal book that has been in canons in the past. It's fascinating because it's so literally cool. The deathbed conversations of each of the 12 patriarchs.
Yeah, it's so cool.
We don't have time to go into every single one of them, but we chose the deathbed conversation of Levi, the priest, and what he's talking about as he has gathered all his sons to him and is explaining to him in great depth. Not just his life, but the future as well. And talk about messianic prophecies, guys.
Oh, man.
If there was ever an apocryphal book that you would want to take out of the canon so that people didn't understand the Messiah, my goodness, this thing is full of Messiah prophecy. It's amazing. Truly amazing. Okay, real quick. And this is going to be in chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. It says, "Now therefore observe whatsoever I command you, children, For whatsoever things that I have heard from my fathers I now declare unto you, and behold, I am clear from your ungodliness and transgression, which you will commit in the end of the ages, against the Savior of the world, the Messiah, by your acting godlessly, deceiving Israel, and stirring up against it great evils from the Lord. And you will deal lawlessly together with Israel, so that he will not bear with Jerusalem because of your wickedness. But the veil of the temple shall be rent, so as to not cover your shame, and you shall be scattered as captives among the Gentiles, and shall be for a reproach and for a curse there. For the house of the Lord, for the house which the Lord shall choose, shall be called Jerusalem, as it is contained in the book of Enoch the righteous. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay.
I love this book.
I know. We're trying not to go 2 hours with this broadcast, but so much in here. But right here, he's pulling his sons together. He already knows that in the latter days that his sons are going to rebel, like we've talked about in Ezekiel passages and other places, the Matthew 23 passage. We know that the Levites themselves, who were given the priesthood, they're going to rebel against the Father and his commands. And as it says here, you're going to commit this great ungodliness and transgression you will commit in the end of the ages against the Savior of the world, acting godlessly and deceiving Israel, stirring up great evils from the Lord. That is just, oh my goodness. And I love it how he's sitting here going, I declare to you that I am clear from your future transgressions.
Yeah. Well, that's, reminiscent of what? Ezekiel 33, where it says, you'll be cleared of their, the blood won't be on your hands if you warn them.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. And so he's telling them, way back when, what's going to happen, specifically pertaining to the Messiah to come. And why would he, at the very end of this, talk about how they're going to be scattered among the Gentiles, taken as captives? We see that happen on two different occasions, both, technically three, right? Both the Assyrians invasion of the northern house, and the Levites that were with Judah, with the Babylonian invasions, and then also in the Romans in AD 70. Jerusalem is burned, 500,000 people are killed, people are scattered, and it's horrible. So all the Levites were a part of that as well, being scattered again because of their unrighteousness. And the Father technically brought great evils upon themselves for rejecting the Messiah. And so I just think this is fascinating because, and it says at the very end, for the house which the Lord shall choose shall be called Jerusalem, as it is contained in the book of Enoch the righteous.
Yeah.
So if you decide to read any of these Testament of the Patriarchs, almost all these guys in their deathbed conversations, they talk about what they learned from the book of Enoch.
Right.
Now, I just want to remind you what we said before we introduced this book. This book, from scholarship, this isn't from Sean Griffin, from scholarship, claims that it was written back in 2nd century BCE. Okay? So it was validated to be in some of the canons throughout history. It just wasn't put in our most modern canon that we have for the last 140 years. So men who were a part of the church and who were even before Christ came, they have a book in their possession that keeps referencing back to another book called the Book of Enoch.
Right.
And as we already read multiple times about our portions and Jubilees, Levi got all the books of the fathers that Jacob passed down to him. Yeah. And they even talk about how they had read in the books of their fathers, Enoch and Shem.
Right.
And, we saw that with Abraham, right? And so it's amazing to see these guys are still talking about the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
It's always being talked about. And it's amazing to me that people claim it's such a fake, it's a forgery. And it's so interesting that the themes in Enoch are paralleled in what we just read here, because Enoch talks about the Messiah in great detail. So how fitting is it for the enemy to try to hide that information so you don't understand not just your Messiah, but also his role as your high priest?
Well, how is it that 200 years before even the birth of Christ, we have in this Testament of the Patriarchs, in the chapter from Levi, he is prophesying the veil and the temple being rent. And he gives us the reason for it. Yes. So we have all these years, people have had all these different, and this is why the veil was rent. And everybody gets into their own little interpretation of that. And here we have Levi, saying this is because of the corruption of the priesthood.
That's right. So as he said, the veil be ripped so that you will no longer be able to cover your shame. So suddenly, sweetie, it seems that we're getting the actual explanation of the veil being torn.
Yeah.
Because as we have already talked about, the ark itself wasn't even behind the veil.
Right.
It was been hidden, so there was technically nothing behind the veil that represented the seat of authority of God and the presence of God that the high priest would go in behind. So this thing is torn and shown open, and it's representing the failure of the priests So their shame is not covered anymore.
Yeah.
The failure of the priests during the days of the scattering of Israel, and also during the days leading up to the Messiah. This is exactly what Levi's talking about in context, connecting their ungodly acts against the Father's commands and against his Messiah is their shame. And the veil is rent and torn, uncovering their shame for all to see.
Yeah.
So much that's even recorded in the Gospels.
I'm sorry, but when I read that, that was 1,000 times more powerful to me as far as the imagery and what was really going on there than any weird explanation I've heard from a preacher about it. I mean,
and that's because we now have the context of the priesthood itself. So, I mean, it's just amazing to me. It's amazing. Yeah. So encouraging. Very excited. This has been a great portion.
And guys, you can find a copy of that book at the same website that we get what we read Jubilees from, and I'm pretty sure it's at
asutapigrapha.com, but the one we're actually reading from tonight is called earlychristianwritings.com, and they've got the text of those. It's translated by R.H. Charles, same guy that translated back in the early 1900s the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch and many other apocryphal works.
And it's available in audio form on YouTube as well.
Yes,
so
it is.
I love my audiobooks.
Absolutely. But other than that, sweetie, is there anything we'd like to conclude with?
Same as always, if you made it all the way through, thanks for sticking around and hearing us out. And as you know, our heart on this channel is really just to help other people comprehend his word to the point where they can actually teach it to others and also deal with any objections, any questions, anything like that. And to do that, you got to have the context. And you know what we say here, context creates comprehension. You can't comprehend this book if you're just reading things totally out of context.
Exactly.
And we just we appreciate you guys, and you can come find us on Facebook. And if you have trouble finding us on Facebook, let us know in the comments and we'll give you a link to our profiles.
That's right.
And
so tonight, for us to understand to comprehend some of what we read in Genesis 49.
Yeah.
We needed to understand more about the priesthood, right? More about what happened in Jacob's life as well, as far as how we knew this information. And then when it came to the actual priesthood, the context helped us really dig deeper and understand the Feast of Ingathering that's mentioned in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, as well as how that pertains to the future kingdom and also to the priesthood. And then further in context of how we're going to understand the veil and why it was torn upon the death of Yeshua, we get from understanding the priesthood even more. So this whole concept, guys, this is what we want to try to provide. All right, so people will be completely knowledgeable about the word that from their Father that they've chosen to believe and follow after in discipleship and faith. And that's our goal for you, that you would continue to read the Bible on your own. And, we hope to see you back here next week as we just continue digging in. We get to start Exodus next week.
Yeah.
It's going to be pretty amazing. So
one book closer to Leviticus. That's me these days.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, and that's the way we feel about it. Because we're basically just ramping up to the priesthood explanation. So anyway, guys, we thank you for joining us. You're welcome to put your comments and questions down below. And like I said, if this blessed you, there's ways to donate to this ministry, and we appreciate you for it. So we'll see you next week. Shabbat shalom, guys.
Bye, guys. Have a good week.